During chapter 99 of Berserk, you will be currently reading through a tense part of the story, the Lost Children chapters. At the end of this chapter, you are expecting to turn the page to see where the scene goes to, but instead of going to chapter 100, you are greeted with something completely different that confuses you, because this is chapter 99.5, the Berserk prototype. I specifically remember not knowing what to do. Am I supposed to read this? Is this part of the story? But regardless, I did read through it and quickly figured out what it was. I guess I was blind to the very first panel out of confusion. But that very first panel does give us some explanation on what this prototype is. It reads, "This story is a submission piece created by Kentaro Muira during college in 1988, which became the basis for what is now Berserk. The establishment of details, worldview and whatnot differs at points from the Berserk series being published today, but the intent is still present of this early incarnation. The story is set after the conclusion of the Band of the Hawk story arc. This was created a whole year before the final publication of Berserk Volume 1. You see throughout this prototype the skeleton of what would eventually come of what we know today as Berserk. Of course, it's more rough around the edges. There are some changes that Miura makes in the final version that fit more with the story he is trying to tell. But for a prototype, this is pretty impressive. And despite its flaws, you can tell that he had found something special. The first aspect I want to discuss is Guts' appearance in this prototype. While his clothing is basically identical to that of the Black Swordsman arc, several other elements are notably altered. He wears an eye patch, which makes sense given that he only has one eye. However, from a design standpoint, I find this choice to be somewhat weaker than just showing the bare eye. Rather than having his crossbow integrated into his mechanical arm, he just carries one around with his other arm, which diminishes the mechanical arm, making it less cool and interesting. Also, the Dragon Slayer sword has a different design. Instead of it maintaining a consistent width, it tapers out towards the hilt, giving it a more conventional crossguard sword appearance. Throughout most of these panels, Guts has this weird looking frown on his face, which I find a questionable choice. The brand also appears altered, taking on a more round shape, and it is located on his chest rather than his neck, which is where Casca's brand is located. Furthermore, it doesn't bleed here when in proximity to apostles. Little details like that are just examples of icing on the cake that probably don't affect too much of the story if they had not been included, but just gives that extra bit of quality that if taken away would make Berserk lose some of its interest. All in all, this appearance compared to the one that he eventually gets is mid! Not only is Guts' appearance different, but his personality is too. He has a more comedic and whimsical nature. There are some goofy expressions he has too. He begins the story already familiar with Puck. Although he maintains some of his edginess and dark undertones, this portrayal significantly differs from the final version we encounter. Personally, I much prefer how our first introduction to Guts is him basically being a dick to everyone around him, even ones who are the kindest on the planet. Because we build this idea of what type of character he is, only for that to get questioned when we see the final panel of the arc that shows us there's more going on, which is one of the best parts of the whole series. Had he retained the more playful behaviour evident in this prototype, I believe the impact of the final panel would have been diminished. It is possible that Miura was attempting to align with the trends in creating a manga that leans more towards the shonen genre. Guts here feels kinda like a grown-up version of Isidro in many aspects. Oh, and he's not called the Black Swordsman here, he's called the Black Knight.
Oh, that sucks.
Thankfully, Kentaro ultimately refined Guts' personality. In terms of the introduction, that again was changed in the final product. Instead of the first panel being Guts clapping demon cheeks, Guts is travelling in a road lined with impaled skeletons on either side, creating an eerie atmosphere that, while unsettling, does not quite match the shock of the panel from the first volume. However, we do encounter a scene that is very reminiscent of the Black Swordsman arc, wherein a group of bandits threaten a young girl. In response, Guts fires arrows at them, eliminating the threat. Another bandit approaches from behind, prompting Guts to unleash his Dragon Slayer upon him. This scenario bears a striking resemblance to the bar scene, albeit with a young girl taking the place of Puck. Interestingly enough, the 1997 anime seems to have blended these two ideas in its first episode. You're getting the same setting as the manga, but replacing Puck with a young girl, similar to the prototype. Speaking of the young girl, who's named Fricka, whom Guts rescues and subsequently returns to a village to get some food, because Guts in this version really loves his food. Some fans observed that Fricka may represent an early conceptualization of Griffith, particularly in terms of the design, given her white hair and androgynous facial features. Especially when you look at very early depictions of Griffith, you can see the similarity. And we know originally that Griffith was supposed to be a woman, which raises intriguing questions about how this initial concept would have been developed. At least visually, it seems that Miura always wanted this yin and yang, light and dark idea to be portrayed, However, to my mind, Fricka bears a closer resemblance to Teresia. Considering the role she plays, it is plausible to suggest that this character may have served as the eventual inspiration for Teresia. When Guts is at Fricka's home, he starts to eat as the father of Fricka begins to tell the tale of the prototype's villain, Vlad Tepes, who has a hobby for impaling individuals on wooden stakes. An example of this gruesome work is depicted in that first panel. It takes women from this village to do this. And yeah, it appears that Miura has always had fascination with the medieval era, as this narrative clearly draws inspiration from Vlad the Impaler. I mean, it's kinda on the nose. His name is Vlad and he impales people. The villagers regard Guts as a capable fighter who may be able to put an end to Vlad's terror. Guts' reaction to this expectation is consistent to the Black Swordsman arc, where he questions the point of even helping others. Kentaro seems to have always had the idea for a broody, edgy loner to be the protagonist of this story. Guts decides to leave, but Fricka manages to catch up with him and asks for something to remember him by, to which he gives her his eye patch. And look how much better that looks. When Puck begins berating Guts for not helping out others and being selfish, we are presented with a big backstory change compared to what we actually get. Guts had a mother, and apostles brutally tore her apart, eating her right before his eyes. That is Guts' motivation for why he hunts apostles and why his personality is the way that it is. It also appears that there is no events such as the eclipse here either. Perhaps this aspect could have been explored further. Maybe we would come to an understanding that there's something bigger going on than what is said here. I hope my bias isn't distorting my view here, but I find this explanation considerably weaker than the motivation presented in the final narrative. Guts was born into a world devoid of family and turned to the only thing he could, only for that to be stripped away from him. For years he found himself alone, thrown himself into relentless battles with nothing left to lose. It was only when he discovered a new family that hope began to arise. And just when some healing had begun to start happening, everything was taken from him once again, betrayed by his closest friend. A story where a character's life is nothing but darkness, but then starts to see the light, only for it to get snatched away again, is by far a better backstory for why Guts is who he is in the beginning of this story. It feels odd in my head that potentially the prototype Guts was just living an ordinary, maybe happy life until one day his mother was killed. As I mentioned, perhaps this could have been elaborated upon, but just with what we are given in this prototype, it is much weaker in my opinion. Inside the carriage, we see Fricka. This marks the first instance where we see the brand of sacrifice, illustrating that the carriage is en route to Vlad's castle. I noted that the appearance of the brand differs in this version, and to me the more rounded look makes it look less threatening. Like it almost looks like a symbol of peace of something, not a representation of demons that eat, grape and terrorize humans. Nevertheless, we are then introduced to good old Vlad, and the overall look, the way he is posing, and the stacks of bodies he has accumulated, I think the building blocks for the count are clearly there. I will say Vlad is pretty creepy, as he makes some uncomfortable remarks regarding Fricka's age and the chilliness of her hands. However, just as he is about to escalate the situation, Guts makes his entrance, leading to a battle between the two. Apart from some facial expressions that Guts makes, this is probably the part of the prototype that feels most like the true Berserk. Even here, Kentaro's art shines, demonstrating he has always been a very capable artist. And dare I say that some of these panels look better than the Black Swordsman arc. The Black Swordsman arc definitely has a sort of look that is different from the rest of the series. Can someone please maybe explain why the prototype looks a bit more refined in some of the panels versus the actual first volume? The Apostle then says something interesting, giving us yet again another diversion from what we know.
The Lord of we who are not human, the most powerful god of this world, the name of the ancient god of darkness, Vuana.
Here, Miura once again introduces the concept of a godlike, omnipotent entity within the narrative. Vuana could have been changed to something like the idea of evil, or based on the phrasing of the dialogue, it may suggest that Vuana is one among many gods, akin to the God Hand. Now the Apostle's final form here is something I also like, and I think I prefer it to the Slug Count. It possesses a rather trollish and ogre-like appearance, characterized by its hairy legs and elongated arms. I consider it to be a decent design. Ultimately, Guts manages to overpower the Apostle by firing a cannon directly in its face, just like his encounter with the Snake Lord, and then slicing through it. This specific shot was indeed featured in the actual publication, but yet again, I think I do in fact prefer the prototype version again. In the final section of the battle, the brand is revealed and is displayed on Guts' chest, and the Apostle remarks,
"That is the brand of sacrifice to Vuana."
It sounds like individuals perform these sacrifices in the name of this god. kind of remind me of like satanic worshippers or something. One thing to note here is that the battle ends without Guts sadistically hurting the Apostle like he did in the Black Swordsman arc. It's one element that Miura definitely dialed up in the final version. It ends with the Apostle dying, Freaker is safe, Puck comments on the fact that Guts came across as sinister, Guts walks off, presumably continuing his hunt for Apostles. And that is where it ends. We don't get the really cool ending of Puck saying the thing, it just ends on a more mild note than the first volume. I will say though, Kentaro seemed to have always known what to do with Puck, as his design and personality are identical to what we get in the Black Swordsman arc. So that's the Berserk prototype, and yeah, I criticise it quite a bit, and you know what? It's kinda stupid, right? Because it's just a very bare bones version of Berserk, which doesn't have any canonical relation to what the story is today. My main reasoning for why I pointed out some of the shortcomings of this prototype is to show how when they were removed or altered, they had a positive impact on what Miura would eventually create. So I'm actually giving him praise for changing things for the better. Also, I always say this as someone who likes to create things. It is always a good thing to see the flaws in artists who are often put on pedestals. It humanizes them and makes you realize that they too exhibit flaws just as you do. It's easy to think talented people are above you, but we both bleed red, and generally, most people are capable of achieving greatness to the level of someone like Kentaro Muira. But you have to do what he did. You have to work towards it. Berserk is fantastic and many people love it, but look at the prototype. It wasn't always like that, was it? I like to view the prototype the same way as a music demo. As someone who has way too many music demos on their computer to the point that they don't even have like proper names, I should probably take Kentaro's approach with my own work. A lot of times I make something and it may have a cool sound. Some go further and I have a lot of decent elements in it, but I don't go any further. I never complete anything. The prototype version is as far as it gets for me, and I don't complete it out of fear of not getting it perfect or messing it up even more. With Berserk, Miura didn't do that. He worked on it. He examined the flaws in this piece of work and altered it to the best of his ability for him to be satisfied enough to release it as a piece of art to the world. Miura knew he had something special in that prototype. Despite the many rough edges, just like popular successful songs, if you listen to the demo version, perhaps there will be some unrefined elements, but the magic that made the song successful will be present within that demo version. Because as the saying goes, you can't polish a turd. So you, just like I, should take a lesson from Kentaro here. Yes, I have so many random songs lying around and perhaps most of them are trash, but maybe there is a sparkle of greatness in them. I want you to recognize that in your own work too. Yeah, that vocal performance you did on that demo isn't the best, I'm not gonna lie, but that guitar riff is something special. And remember everyone, you really only have to succeed once. Miura found it, and I hope all of us do too.